Hello and welcome to Extra Credit with me, Teacher Michael. This is a podcast made by online educators for online educators. Hello and welcome back to the Extra Credit podcast. And if you're new, welcome here for the first time. My name is Michael Venn. I am your host, and you can find me online at teacher__Michael. That's my handle on Instagram, and that's where I spend a lot of my time. And I'm really excited to share today's episode with you. Today, we are talking about travel. And I wanted to start off this episode with a little question for you. I'm wondering if you have ever thought about yourself and your partner taking 12 months and traveling all over the world. If you have, you are not alone. I've thought about that myself. I know so many other people out there have. And today's guest, VIPKid teacher Kimberly, has also thought about that. Not only did she think about it, she did it. And we are going to talk about her and her husband Ashton's adventures all around the world over the course of the last 12 months. If you want to preemptively find Kimberly and Ashton and Dino online, you can find them on Instagram at dino.vipkid. There are all kinds of photos from their travels, and if you're able to scroll through their Instagram feed while you're listening to this podcast, even better, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of visuals there that will help sort of support and animate today's episode as we spend most of it talking about travel. So I'm really excited. This is the Vagabond edition, the Travelers edition of the Extra Credit podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Kim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Excellent. I love it. Technology is working, and we're back. We are rolling for season 2 of the Extra Credit podcast. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I know that you are largely known as being a traveling teacher. So I have to start things off by asking where in the world you are.
I am currently in Canada. So we finished my husband and I, we went to travel to 22 different countries in 13 months. And then we came back. So the plan was just to be away for a year and then return. So we're now back at home in Ottawa, Ontario.
Canada represent.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've talked to many Canadian people on my podcast, but I always do like talking to Canadians wherever I am in the world. So welcome. And I do have so many questions about your travels and about specifically your teaching and traveling escapades. But before we get into any of that stuff, I would love to hear from you kind of how you got into the world of teaching in the first place. It could be online teaching or otherwise.
Yeah, so I discovered when I was in grade 4 that I wanted to be a teacher. I was one of those, you hear the typical story of the teacher who changed your life. Well, that was for me. Very true. So I had, in French, we say la tête dans la lune. And I would just be thinking about other things. I'd be daydreaming, and I lacked the focus, and I just couldn't connect with the material in the classroom. But then I had a teacher in grade 4. He was this old man, and he loved to crack jokes and do storytelling. And I discovered that through the storytelling, it really ignited my passion for learning. So that's when it kind of just clicked for me, and I just fell in love with school. And then I wanted to be a teacher like him one day. Yeah, so fast forward, I completed degrees. I had my teaching degree. I had a master's degree in second language education. And then I went into the classroom, and I didn't recognize the classroom. It actually was nothing like how I remembered it. There were smart boards, and the math was being taught completely differently. It was discovery learning, where you don't give the equations, you just let them discover the math. And, long division was taught different. Everything had changed. And it wasn't exactly the classroom that I had remembered. I still enjoyed it, but it occurred to me that it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. So I knew I wanted something teaching related, but not specifically the traditional brick and mortar setting. Um, as I said, I had a background in second language education, so I started doing teaching for second language learners, at the University of Ottawa, and I loved that as well. And of course, stumbled into VIPKid. You were going to say something.
What you
Yeah.
first said initially was, about you being a student who maybe had difficulty paying attention or retaining the information. I was just going to say that I connect so strongly to that as a student, that experience. Like, that was totally the experience that I had as a child. And it's funny that you mentioned how, storytelling that this teacher would do sort of helped you retain that information. That was a tactic that a buddy of mine and I used in university as we were studying our theater degrees and learning plays and da 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 da. For some of the courses that weren't storytelling based, like anthropology or I don't know, a number of other courses. That's how we would study. Like, he would take all the information, synthesize it, and tell it to me in a story. And that's how I got into the exam. And I was like, oh, I remember my friend telling me this story about so and so, and there was a piece of information. And then the next part of the story happened, and there was another piece of information buried. And so it was just that conversational style. That's how I learned best. So I was just fascinated to hear that about you as well.
Yeah, that's so cool. And you know what? People do that even in the VIP classroom with higher level students too, to connect the material. And you think, oh, we can't really extend through stories. You can absolutely extend through stories with these classes.
Hmm. So have you taught French as well?
I did a little bit of substitute teaching in French, yes, but not a full year of teaching in French. No.
Okay. So I do want to move into some of the travel stuff because, for anyone who's followed me online or watched any of my YouTube stuff, I love traveling. I love talking about traveling. I love talking to travelers. So when you say that you visited 22 countries in 13 months, is that correct?
That's it, yes.
Where did that idea come from?
Well, it's funny because I met my husband about 12 years ago while we were in university. And at the time, I was saying to him, well, my life plan is I'll go to university and then I'll do 2 years of travel, just like my mother did, and I don't know where you fit in the picture. And it was interesting at the time because we were a fresh pair, and he adjusted my framework by saying, well, why only travel, once we've finished university? Why not do smaller trips every year? And I really had to shift the way that I had thought about travels previously, and thought, oh, yeah, I don't necessarily have to spend a month or a year in one place. I could just do smaller trips. So I adopted his mindset then. But what's interesting is over the next 12 years, he started thinking about my old mindset, and the seed had been planted.
Hmm.
So there was one day before the wedding, he came home from work and looked a little discouraged. I said, what is it? And he said, life's just moving so fast. We're going to get married, then have children, and I don't know if I'm ready yet. And I said, oh, okay, well, in that case, what's on your bucket list? Because we can knock things off the bucket list. And he said, well, call me crazy, but I think I want to travel for a year with you. And this is years later, right? But I just thought, yes, let's absolutely do it. I work online, so my job is portable. Whereas with him, he could take a year of sabbatical. He works for the Environment and Climate Change Canada, so he works for the government. And one time in their career, the government workers can take a year off unpaid. So we thought, let's just do it.
That's super interesting. That's fascinating. Like, it's, so many people's dream, I think, to see the world in that way and to spend a bunch of time going everywhere. So, as I look through your Instagram account, which is amazing, by the way, I love all the photos of Dino, not only you and your husband, but also Dino, all over the place. Where did that idea come from that you wanted to feature him in the travels like that?
When I started the Instagram account, I had no idea what Instagram was. I just thought, yeah, I'll start this and it'll be a way of connecting with other teachers. So that was the intended audience, was just teachers. I was able to get a dyno from the San Francisco office. I told them, hey, look, I'm going to be traveling. I can document it. Maybe we can do some collaborations together. So they sent me a dyno and I took pictures in different places. And I was surprised at how many people just loved seeing this yellow plushie everywhere. So it drew in more people than I could have imagined, and fellow travelers too. People would share with me tips. I would post about a different country and they'd say, oh, I went here and you have to go to this restaurant. And everyone was getting excited about it, which got me more excited about it. And I mean, you're a fellow traveler. You don't always look so pretty when you're traveling, right? Sweating
This
all the
is
time.
true.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I actually found it quite a relief to have something else to photograph, because I would want to record where I was, but I wouldn't necessarily want a picture of myself.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. So it was just really great, and then I could get creative with it too, and it's some comic relief as well. Yeah.
No doubt. So, you mentioned tips in there, and that's something that I do want to get into in this podcast episode because presumably there are other online teachers and other travelers who are listening to this who aspire to do what you did. So, do you have any tips for them? Like, do you think this is accessible or possible for other people to do, or are you an anomaly as a traveling teacher?
No, it's absolutely possible. And I met a lot of fellow traveling teachers while we were on the road. So, yeah, definitely 100% doable.
So what are those steps that people can take if they do want to travel, or better yet, maybe what are the steps that you took to say like this is how I'm going to set myself up for success when I'm not at home and when I am moving from place to place and trying to create a schedule that's consistent-ish if you can't even do that when you're traveling so extensively. What are those steps that you took?
Well, that's a really good question there. It depends on the type of travel that you do. Ours was very fast-paced travel, and we were just moving frequently from one country to another. So ours is a little bit different than other people that I've met and their journey. But for me personally, I found that before I left, what I decided to do was, while still in North America, I started opening up different time slots. So I previously had only worked during the peak hours in the morning time, which is evening in Beijing. But then I decided, you know what, I'm going to open up the evenings, which would be daytime hours in Beijing. And it took a few months, actually, probably 2 or 3 months, to build up a student base of students who were consistently booking me during those hours. And the reason why I did that is because in some places, like New Zealand, it's the hours will start at something like 2:30 in the afternoon, and the peak times are at 3 a.m. So I knew I didn't want to be working those wonky hours. Um,
Right.
and I wanted to get bookings anytime that I would open up some time slot. So I had to set myself up for success by preparing for it months in advance and building up a clientele so that I could just open up any time slot and get it filled.
That's great. That's such a smart approach, and it's good to do that. I think to do some trial and error. That's certainly something I did in the beginning, and I wasn't even intending to go traveling, but I just wanted to see what kind of energy I had during the day, and I quickly found I opened a bunch of slots in the evening, and I was like, oh geez, by the end of the day, I'm beat. Like I'm not ready to teach. So even though I wasn't a morning person, I found that I did have more energy teaching in the morning, but that only came through trial and error. Um, and so another question that I get asked a lot as I've posted some videos about, teaching and traveling and being at a Airbnb or a hotel or whatever like that. People always are asking about the background. What do you do for a background? What kind of props do you bring? Like how is that even possible? So I'm curious your thoughts on A, backgrounds, and B, props.
Well, firstly, I'd like to emphasize that it's so important to have something, because I think sometimes teachers go in thinking, oh, this job is going to be so easy and I don't need anything. I'll just go into a dimly lit area and I'll let the computer lighting just light my face blue. And
Yes, yes.
you don't want to do that because you still want to look very professional in the classroom. But there are so many alternatives that are lightweight and that make it very easy to travel. So I had three different backgrounds that I would use depending on the wall type. I never wanted to peel any paint, especially if I was going to Airbnbs or anything like that.
Hmm.
I didn't want to puncture any walls, so I wanted it to be very friendly for the environment we were in. So it was easy to put up and easy to take down as well. So for me, I have one of them is little wall stickers, like in a child's bedroom, how you might put you could put owls and a tree, or you could put little circles. So mine are circles.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the first one. The second one is I created my own teaching background out of some material, and I wrote my teacher name on it, and it's a rectangular, so it just frames me very well in the classroom. And I would put those adhesives on the back of it. So if I was teaching somewhere with a brick back wall, it'd be very easy to just stick those adhesives on there. So that was the second one. And the third one was just finding anything in the room.
Right.
If I went to a place and it had a really nice painting, I'd be teaching in front of that painting, or I might just put up on a shelf or something my teacher name. So I had a few printables that I brought with me before leaving, my teacher name and a math sheet, days of the week, months of the year, the weather. So I had a few printable items that I had with me, and I could just stick them up strategically in the classroom as well.
That's so funny you say that because I've had the same experience walking into a hotel room that I didn't know what to expect, and I'm like, that painting is amazing. That would make a great background, and it's right near the window, and there's all kinds of light here, and this is perfect. And that's also something I did when looking at Airbnbs. Like, it wasn't the first thing I considered, but it was always in the back of my mind as I was looking through the photos. Would that make a good spot for a background, or does it look like it has lots of windows and lots of natural light and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. When scouting places, you're always thinking of what would be good for a teaching environment, and is the wireless high speed enough? I would send the host some computer tests so that they could run them and tell me what the speed test results are, and I'd say, okay, that'll be up to snuff for us. And one thing I would do when I'd enter the Airbnb, let's say, is take pictures of everything, but because I knew that I'd be moving around the furniture. so I took
Right, right.
Yeah, so I'd take pictures of everything, especially there were some places we stayed a little bit longer in, up to 3.5 weeks was one of them. And so I just wanted to make sure that everything would be found in the place where it started.
So one thing that I have suggested to other teachers before is if they want to get into traveling and teaching, is to not necessarily say, okay, 12 months, go. It's more of an approach of, why don't you try a weekend trip, or go to grandma's for a couple days, or go to your folks' house if they live in town. Is that something you did? Had you done smaller micro teaching traveling trips, or did you just go full bore, like into the deep end?
I never really thought of it before until you mentioned it now, but I didn't do it intentionally, but I had done smaller trips. My husband and I, both of our families live in Toronto, which is a 5 hour drive from us in Ottawa. So we would frequently go over to see both families throughout the years. And I would end up setting up my classroom if it was a 4 or 5 day weekend that I was taking off time to go see them. I might just work a few hours in the evening or in the morning and set up there. So, yeah, I guess I did have some practice, not intentional, but it did help me think about placement and about how to carry things with me.
Right. And so, as I looked through your Instagram account, there was photos of you and your husband, and of course, Dino. I'm going to list off a few countries here: Thailand, Vietnam, Singapore, Nepal, Italy, Austria, Peru, New Zealand, and of course, China. So, for someone who has traveled in so many different time zones in the world. I have to ask you, did you have a favorite time zone?
Oh my gosh, Asia. Asia was the best. I loved teaching in Asia because it was perfect. I same as you, I'm not an incredibly early morning person. I will do it, but I don't enjoy it as much. I much prefer to sleep in. So when I was in Asia, I could sleep until 8 or 9 in the morning and then wake up, feel very refreshed, teach a whole lineup of classes. We're talking 8, 10, 12 hours of work if I wanted to. I could just open up those times and work them and then have the evenings off. And I actually really like to have dinners free and have open evenings to just wander. So I really, really loved teaching in Asia. Europe is also really nice because the peak times aren't too early in the morning and you can wake up. But the only thing about Europe is you don't have the option of working evening classes if you wanted to. And I like having the option actually of morning or evening.
Yeah, I can understand. It is nice having the option. I wonder from a schedule standpoint, because you're traveling and yes, the work part is important to fund some of the travels, but you also want to see the places that you're in. So, did you find that you were like overloading your schedule on certain days and trying to get all of your teaching into 2 or 3 days and then having 4 days off? Or were you teaching like sprinkling it out throughout the 7 days of the week? Or like what was that schedule for you?
You know what? It actually completely changed depending on where we were and what activities we wanted to do. But I loved the flexibility of it. I did all short notice classes, so I just opened it up the day before. And some places, when we were more settled for a few weeks, I would just clock in a couple or even a few hours in the morning, and then we'd go venture into the city or the wildlife the rest of the day and then return. Other places, because we knew, okay, I won't have access to internet when we're in Nepal and the more rural areas of Nepal. So why don't I just work a few heavy days right now and then take the rest of the week off? So I did both.
Now Wi-Fi, the big Wi-Fi question. Where I always love knowing where has the best Wi-Fi. I know for me when I taught, my only brick and mortar experience was teaching English in Korea, and I was blown away by the internet there. It was so fast. I had never experienced internet that fast. So, where was it that you were like, oh yes, this is the best internet in the world?
You know what? I didn't have that experience. There were so many places that had really high speed internet, Korea being one of them, Japan being another. I the only thing is the internet that was slowest. That probably stood out more.
Oh yeah,
And for
right.
me, that was the Philippines. Oh my word. Because it's a series of small islands, and so the internet is really shoddy depending on where you are. You'd have to be in a major city to get something reliable. And even still, I was teaching in one of the major cities in Mactan, in Cebu, and the power went out one day, and there are lots of natural disasters as well. So you have to have a backup and all of these other things. So the Philippines, I found a little stressful, but pretty much everywhere else was just fine. And even I remember when we were in Thailand, the Wi Fi wasn't necessarily good, but there is a SIM card. So I would also get SIM cards as my backup. All I had to do was unlock my cell phone before I left for travels, and then I was able to swap the SIM cards and get a data plan. So I found that in Thailand, it was unlimited data for dirt cheap. And what I ended up doing was hotspotting. So that worked just fine.
Nice. Super, super good tip right there. Um, One thing I've got to talk about, and this is something that I've seen people kind of addressing more and more on social media, is the sort of the realities of your life versus what you see on Instagram. And you kind of alluded to it earlier that traveling's not always pretty.
Sweaty? Yeah.
Yeah. So like, when I look at your Instagram feed, I'm like, oh my God, that looks like the perfect trip and everything's going smoothly and every day is a sunset. and blah blah blah. Like it looks lovely, like it really does, and I'm sure the majority of it was, or so much of it was. But can you speak to some of the difficulties maybe that you faced, or that you think other travelers might face if they were doing a long trip like that?
Well, I'll answer two parts of that question. The first one being the illusion of everything going so well, which just, I mean, isn't the case. And also, when you go to certain places, what I found was I enjoyed the places I hadn't expected. And the ones that I was really looking forward to didn't necessarily measure up to what I was looking for. So it was really interesting based on expectations. And one example of that, I remember being in Japan in Kyoto, and there's this golden temple that you can go to. So we hopped on a train and bus, and we took 2 hours to get there, and it was packed with tourists. Packed. So then we went in and we were being herded like sheep. So you have this massive crowd, and there's this pagoda on top of a small, small, tiny island. I mean, this island can only fit the pagoda. Okay. So it's a golden pagoda in the middle of the lake, and everyone was just, you only had the time to walk around one circuit and then you had to exit. So it was one way traffic. You couldn't double back. And I remembered thinking, wow, I mean, I'd seen the pictures and I thought, oh, this looks so beautiful. And what a wonderful experience it'll be. But when I was there, it was just very frantic, actually. There were so many people pushing and shoving and trying to squeeze in some pictures. And it wasn't at all what I expected. Whereas there were other places that took me by surprise, like in Cambodia, the ruins and places where no one was, and you're just spending hours staring at it. So the expectations and the representation on social media, of course, don't do them justice, because you just see the finished product and not necessarily all the crowds and the chaos that's going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
Oh, and then the second part of your question of things that went wrong. Oh my gosh, how much time do you have? Okay, I spoke with other travelers. I don't want to scare anyone off, because other travelers had zero issues. And it's partly because they would do slow travel. So they'd spend a month in one place and then another month in another place. And they would just gradually acclimatize to each place. But with us, it was very fast paced. So sometimes we would drop the ball on something, including there was one time in Korea, we got kicked out of our place while I was in the middle of teaching a class.
Oh no.
Yeah. So it turns out while I was working, my husband did all of the planning. And I mean, he had a lot of moving parts. It was a job in and of itself, coordinating everything and planning it. So he was really amazing at doing that. But there was one time in Korea that the dates had overlapped and he forgot something. So, in fact, we were supposed to have checked out a day earlier, but it was an oversight. So what happened was I was teaching in the middle of a class and I heard knock, knock, knock. Of course, I have to pretend nothing's going on. Ashton went, he checked the door, and then he started waving me down. And he said to me, "Look, we have 10 minutes to pack up and we have to leave."
Right, yeah.
What do you do, right? You have this person in front of you. Okay, goodbye. Right? So I had to just end the class. I had one other class after that, which I had to cancel right away. So I canceled it. I ended that class and then just packed up. We just threw everything into the one suitcase and threw it into the hallway. And then we had no accommodations for that night. So, and that location, that Airbnb actually had a pocket Wi Fi. So we didn't bother getting the SIM card. That was one of our mistakes. We didn't have a backup and we didn't have the Wi Fi anymore. So we were roaming around in the corridors trying to connect, trying to bounce off of someone else's Wi Fi so we could book a location and we could have somewhere to stay that night.
Not an ideal situation.
Yeah, things go wrong.
That's so funny. Well, I had the pleasure of meeting not only you in person, but meeting your husband Ashton. So I'm curious. He's not in the work, like he's not a VIPKid teacher himself, right? You say that he works for the government of Canada. So
Correct.
what does he think about you and your job, or what did he initially think when you were like, I'm doing this online teacher thing?
He was always very supportive. So going back to the origin story, it was difficult to find teaching jobs in Ontario. So I was doing a load of different types of work, all contractual. I was doing some supply teaching, which meant I had to be available throughout the week. I was doing work at the university, but it was part-time work and dependent on student enrollment. So if there weren't enough students, you didn't get work. Right? So when this opportunity came along, it was just a blessing for both of us because it allowed me to work some part-time hours in different time slots so that I could manage both or even up to 3 jobs at the same time. And then when we went traveling, he was very grateful for it. But I think he developed a new appreciation for the work that I did while we were traveling because we'd be in the same room together and he would see just how much energy you've got to muster for these classes
Yeah.
and sustain
Yeah.
them for several hours, right? And he was really great. He would prepare lunches and run them over to me or little snacks or something, tried to take care of me really well while I was pulling longer hours. And he just, yeah, he got to see a lot of the behind the scenes, and I think he appreciated it a lot more.
I love that. That's so lovely. What a guy. Going to get some meals and stuff like that. And yeah, I love it. I love it.
I always told him he'd be a great teacher, but he said not for him. He'd rather do the logistical work in the background, so that was fine. It worked out, yeah.
So we are going to wrap up here soon, but I just wonder, sort of, we're getting into kind of final thought territory. Do you have any thoughts for, I don't know, not even first time travelers necessarily, but anyone who has a desire to teach and travel? Do you have any words of wisdom for them, or cautionary tales?
You know what? I want to give them encouragement. I mean, I met so many people who delayed their travel plans for so many years thinking, I can't do it because I have kids. I can't do it because I don't have enough money. I can't do it because, but you really can make it work. You can travel on a budget. You can do slow travel, which is it can be very profitable if you're staying in Asia. It's really cheap living, and you can actually turn a big profit with working more hours with VIPKid. And I met so many traveling families. It was really inspirational to see parents with their kids. And I'm not talking about a 2-week vacation. I mean long-term travel with families. So it is absolutely possible. If there's a desire there, then you can find a way to make it work for sure.
What a very lovely note to end our conversation on. Thank you so much. Welcome home. Welcome back to Canada.
Thank
I
you.
hope you've enjoyed your summer. And yeah, just thank you so much for sharing some of your experience and taking the time to join me on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that is today's episode. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for taking some time to join me on the podcast and share your story. And that's just a reminder to me, really, that I need to be speaking to more kick-ass Canadians because Kimberly is certainly one of them. And I know there's so many more out there. And I want to talk to them, all right? So, a couple things before we end the podcast here. Once again, if you want to find Kimberly, Ashton, and Dino online, you can find them at dino.vipkid on Instagram. You can find me at teacher__Michael. I'm not going to mention how much I want you to rate and review this podcast on iTunes, although I really just did. Instead, what I do want to encourage you to do is to share this podcast with someone who you think will enjoy it. A fellow teacher, a fellow traveler, or just a curious mind that you happen to know. I would love it if you could share this podcast. Anyway, that is all from me. Thank you so much for listening. And until the next episode, have fun teaching. See ya!